It's the morning star drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another week's episode of the MSD on 117.8 on Tuesday. I'm Eddie here with Bible Today, and we'll have Rachel with 2G Talks. How's everyone doing, right? 1 week out from 316, and I hope that wherever you are across the world, that things have been eventful and great. And I think, as with all things happening within Providence, it's all reflected in the message, right? And I would say that this week's message was a very full and a very eventful message, right? It was quite different, and it was very informative. And I don't know about for you guys, I think it's an answer. It's like it provided answers to a lot of questions that I had for a while, and it seemed to really fit, what I was going through this week, right? And that part is of no surprise, but when we look at what exactly the message was talking about, and then go back to that traditional answer of yeah, it perfectly fits what I was talking about, it always provides the answer to what it is that we need for that particular week, right? And the message talked about learn, right? If you do not know, it is suffering and death, right? Learn, right? If you do not know, it is suffering and death, right? That's what the message was about. And this was really shocking for me. Today I just got back to Florida. It's Sunday still for me, right? On March 23rd. And I had a red-eye flight last night, right? So I listened to the message in Korean late last night, right before boarding back from San Francisco. And, I landed early Sunday morning. And I have a visitor here with me who I won't reveal yet as to, who it is. They're not going to make an appearance on the MSD as far as I know. But they're here in Florida, and they're not really sure why, they're here. But, already I can kind of see maybe part of the things that the Holy Trinity are trying to do through this person. And I'm sure that throughout this week, we'll see more of those things. But I'm already seeing some things, right? And I know it's not this person working per se, but it's the Holy Trinity kind of one expressing themselves through this person and making things happen that, otherwise wouldn't happen, right? Unless this person were here. And so this person and I were coming up from the airport. And so we joined service kind of late today, but this message was so deep, and it kind of perfectly fit a lot of the things that are happening, right? And so one of the things, the first kind of major update for today was we've been doing this program with the SS here in American Providence. Every 2 weeks, we've been meeting together and teaching and having them listen to something sermons from 2006, which is really interesting because I think recently, and if you look over some of the lecturing education material over the last 4 or 5 years, it talks about going back and listening to Sun's lectures from 2006, right? Those are very, very key lectures, both in terms of their content and in terms of their form, right? Teaching us how to lecture something, how to make it like a story, how to make it so that we're actually resolving the question for the newcomer or for the life that's learning, or even for ourselves, right? So that it's not just a mechanical application of teaching the word, right? But it's something that really is more than just a sum of the parts and of the words that we express. So anyways, we've been going through this program with the SS, but these last two lectures, there wasn't something from 2006 for them, right? From the week before 316, the message was that we were supposed to listen to was on the rapture. And in 2006, something hadn't yet given the word about the rapture. I think many people will remember that many of the messages about the rapture started to come out from about 2012, right? Around then-ish, right? That's when a lot of them started to come out, right? In those few years leading up to it. And, definitely more so in 2013 and 2014 leading up to the beginning of 2015 and such, right? So before that, obviously, there were not a whole lot of messages, and there definitely wasn't recordings from something about the rapture as a lesson, right, of the 30 principles, in the same kind of format as, there is now. And the second one related to it was about the Advent, was about Jesus's advent and things. And of course, in the past we used to relate it to the parable of the clouds and such and stuff like that. But Korea gave a list of 10 lessons, and they said at least 7 of these the second generation should learn from a very skilled lecturer one-on-one, right? That was the requirement. They should learn all 30 principles, but these, like, at least 7 of these 10 core lessons they should learn directly, right, from a skilled lecturer, so that there's no confusion, was the kind of direction. And we kind of took that and we ran with it, and we especially wanted them to be able to hear also Sensing's lectures. So we kind of were trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone with this approach, with this program. But because we didn't have video recordings for either Rapture or for the Advent, we kind of had to adjust, right? And I was like, what can I do, right? And like, still in this week, there's many AP leaders and members who are still in Korea, or they're just coming back, right? So there's a lot of adjustment going around. And so because of that, it was really hard to like gather resources from anyone and to check in, right? Like to see if like someone can provide something, whether there is a recording that I don't know of. And even among the SS team and the leaders, like all of them were in Korea too. So I was like, okay, I know that I have to do something because no one else is here. And it was like particularly confusing because I got sick just a few days before Saturday. So I was like, okay, no one is available. I don't have any video resources. So I still think that, we have to prepare something. And so I was like, oh, okay, what should I do? Right? Like, one of these suggestions that I got before was to play something's predestination video lecture, because of the 2006 lectures, that's supposed to be one of the best ones. I mean, of course they're all good, but the pivotal story of something being swindled in predestination, something kind of really goes over it in a very moving way and in a very raw way, in a way that might be hard to capture from a third person telling it, right? It's he himself, right? Through his own story of being swindled, the man in mission, and the person who realized the word too, that's the source and the core of that lesson, right? And so of course that's such a good thing to have the SS be able to see. And they definitely should at some point, but I was praying about it. But while predestination was important, it wasn't on that list of those 10 lessons that they really need to learn from an individual lecturer and stuff. So I was like, okay, maybe they should still learn the Advent and resurrection and stuff. So I went over things with them, and kind of related to this week's message, I was thinking about a couple things, right? Because a lot of these things, especially rapture and resurrection, even though the kids don't know off the top of their dome all the details about the lesson, generally speaking, they know the overall form. Of course, some of the details may be fuzzy, and as they live their lives and they're not really thinking about any of the particular lessons. And this goes for us too, right? If we're not thinking in particular about the fire lesson, or in particular about clouds, or in particular about purpose of creation, or about rapture, right? Then the scriptures that we use for those lessons might not come to mind readily, right? If we're not people who actively evangelize or lecture or review these messages, right? All of us, right? And I kind of give that example to them, right? If you get a pop quiz in school, right? And if you weren't practicing those things readily, then you might not do that well on a pop quiz, right? Versus a test that you prepared for, that you knew about in advance, then all of us may be a lot more prepared for those kind of exams, right? But on the damn day, right, we don't really know all the details about clouds, about Advent and stuff like that. And so I talked to them about that, and related to this week's message about learning, right? If you do not know, it is suffering and death. I kind of told them it's interesting because both within Providence and within life in general, there are many times where people may just expect you to know about something, even though it doesn't it's not something that you should know or that you may know, right? And there's many different situations for this, right? I think more common to our listeners maybe like when you start a new job, or like when you're at work, right? And your boss or your manager or just someone else at your work like thinks that you should know how to do something, right? And you don't know, right? And there may be good reasons you don't know, right? You never learned, right? You were never taught it, right? And sure, you may try it, right? Even though you've never been taught or you just don't know. But like, there's a fair reason for why you don't know certain things, right? And for that person, like if they're your boss or your manager, maybe even the person that is supposed to teach you, maybe for them it's easy because they've been doing it for a long time, etc., etc. And so for a lot of our listeners, like maybe that example is more common, right? But specifically in the context of SS and second generation, where it comes off the most often is between parents or other members in Providence, like especially the older members and leaders who like oftentimes, and this happens like for us too, right? As we're newcomers or young in faith or new, or there's just something in Providence that you don't know, and people expect you to know, right? Because you've been here a while and things like that, right? And I think many times on the MSC we've had this kind of related conversation many times, and so I'm not going in that same flow that we normally do. But like just like with this message, right? It's only when we learn that we know, that we avoid that suffering and death, and not just avoiding the suffering and death. It's only when you learn and know that you know how to do something and that you're able to do it. And so that was kind of like a core part of the message. And so I was telling them, like, when I was young, there's so many things I didn't know. And when you don't know, you don't even know what questions to ask, because a common a phrase in English, right, at least in the US, is, right, you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't even know what questions to ask because you don't know how to like label it or how to explain your confusion. And that makes perfect sense, right? And so I was telling them, right, like there's many things, right, like, and I gave kind of like a a primitive example, right? Like the one I gave was like with tying shoelaces, right? I asked like all of the SS who are now in junior high school or high school, like, at what age did you like learn how to tie your shoes? Right? Like for me, it was probably not until I went into the first grade that I learned how to tie my shoes, and I didn't know how to tie them well, right? Like, cause no one really taught me, right? People kind of showed it to me, like really quickly, but like it was very confusing, right? Because up until that point, right, until I was like 5, 6 years old, I mostly wore shoes that either had Velcro or just didn't require laces, right? And so like I don't think I even knew what shoelaces were when suddenly, right, like they give me these new shoes that have shoelaces, and I'm like, what the heck are these things? Like, what are these strings for, right? And you just have no idea how to tie them, right? But like when your parents are giving you these shoes and when you're going to school, like for them, they've been tying shoes for like 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? And so like for them it's something that just makes so much sense and it's easy, and they just kind of, they may just expect you to know, right? And there's plenty of other examples, right, that I'm sure that each and every single person has experienced, right? So I told them the same thing about the word and about providence, and I kind of gave them that example about shoes, in particular because I wanted the SS in particular to know that that feeling that they sometimes get in Providence, that there's this expectations that they should know because they were born in Providence and have been here for a long time. That's not just in Providence, right? Because I don't want them to think that that's a Providence exclusive thing and become resentful. That's just a life thing, right? That happens, as we talked about, with our bosses, and talks about with our family, and all of these kinds of things. And so like things like I guess like the big takeaway from this that led into the lesson was like typically when you're just on the learner's end of the Bible study, maybe the lecturer will have a PowerPoint or some visuals, or like they'll just draw things on a board or something like that. But you don't like see like the lecturer's notes or their outline if they use one. And maybe if the lecturer is super advanced, they won't even use one at all, right? At all during the entire time of the lecture, right? So there's that too. So you have no idea how they prepare, like how they know this stuff, all of that kind of stuff. And like even in terms of the Bible, right? Like even in terms of the both the Bible from that's been settled for the last 2,000, 6,000 years that we read, and like these lecture outlines and resources, and like all the books that something said he just wrote, like his works are a little bit different, but the things that we provide for outlines, like it's not that like it was just all available somewhere, but people had to prepare, the members had to, right? So this is not just like knowledge that everyone has, right? Of course, like many of the tools that we do come up with, we share like as lecturers, as people. And there's also probably like private versions, right? That people have expended a lot of effort to prepare for themselves so that they can become skilled lecturers, right? And that fits for their characteristics, right? So it just makes sense that like things can be unclear and they don't know, right? So I shared with them like going over the Advent lecture, right? There's like the lecture outline that was prepared by Pastor Joseph, right? Like more than 10 years ago now at this point. And like there's a PowerPoint that goes along with it. And so for this time, I didn't go like line by line over the outline, but I shared my screen and I say like, so this is typically what it might look like, right? If you don't have your own set of lecture notes, and if you haven't memorized a lesson or like prepared enough so that you don't need tools, right? Like there's this outline and there's this PowerPoint, and I showed both on my screen. And we kind of went over some of the most important points. And I think it was very insightful for them because this is like background things that they never knew, right? And I'm sure like for me, like I don't know if I'm publicizing things that people don't know too, but like like after the Sunday message is over, like if you're a member, if you're an active standing member of the church, right, then you can like review the message and stuff like that. But I don't think the SS know that, or they know any of the processes behind these kind of things. And so like there's so many things that the SS don't know, and because of that there's this confusion and this inability, this suffering, and this inability to take action on the things that we need to do, right? So this is like perfectly in line with the message, and so I implore the kids to learn and to ask questions. And like in going back to the part about questions, like sometimes you don't even know, like you don't know what you don't know, right? And so the only way to kind of get there is to ask the question anyways. Maybe the question you're asking isn't even the thing that you're curious or that you're confused about. And the answer, and because that's not your actual question, maybe the answer that you get will not be the answer that you need, right? And then so the person answering, like you should both be working towards getting to the root of the question. And oftentimes you can't even get the question from people, right? Like you need to check and discern like with the Holy Spirit and with the Word and on your own and put in that work, right? You can't just be spoon-fed everything, right? Like even something too, he wasn't spoon-fed all the answers, but like still too, this process of checking does involve more than just like a superficial kind of like asking something, and then if you don't like hear the answer that you want, just giving up on like what it is that you are trying to resolve entirely. And that's kind of like the big update from the SS, and kind of related to this, like related to the message, we'll have after the break a small portion from Bible Today, and I'll hand it off with Rachel with 2G Talks.
The Holy Spirit as one, united with the Lord. There is so much work to do every moment. Led by the Holy Spirit's design.
Yes, hope you all enjoyed that break. And so kind of leading into Bible today with I guess one of the big takeaways from the message, and for me, like I said, this message really hit the core of a lot of things, like a lot of different things that I was going through that I know that I should review this message and take action on and learn from this message too, right? But one of the big things was about learning and becoming competent in something, in the things that we want to do for Providence History, and finding that opportunity and learning about it and learning about the work that we should do for Providence. Because one of the things that I really believe for everyone, and especially for the listeners of the MSD, is that there are things, right? And I'll say it. I'll say there is something that you want to do for Providence History. Right? Whether it's like an overarching goal that you have or a very specific project or task that you want to do. And this isn't the first time we talked about this on the MSD, right? And many people have different projects, right? And I know for Ray, right, he started this Providence apologetics project, which I know that I should be doing more to help out with. But it's in general, it's just really amazing that people have these different things, right? Even for Pastor Sky, having this channel and the Rebel Pastor channel, and as well as anything else, these are all different things that we want to do for Providence. And as the message said, these are all things that we can learn to become more competent in, so that God can trust us with these things, and so that we can produce fruit, right? So for me, one of the things that came to mind is that for a very long time, I really wanted to translate 선생님's books, because I really felt that it was very important. And it wasn't until I listened to this message that the thought crossed my mind that, I can probably find a better way than I have been employing so far to translate his books. Because, I don't know, in my mind, I guess to date, I kind of had this notion that if I had to say it in a rudimentary way, that I had this notion that I had to struggle for it. Right, that I had to struggle to translate some of these books, that I had to put in that painstaking effort and toil and make it that something that I invested a lot of effort into. And that's still true, right? In terms of the sincerity, right? I should be earnest while doing this work and know the value of it, but value and effort, right? Time versus how much progress is made, those two aren't exactly the same thing. And the message even talks about this too, right? You can use time well to do something that you should normally take you 10 hours and do it in 1 hour, right? So there's better ways to do it, right? So I don't know, I said it in a very kind of this rudimentary way that I always thought that it had to be hard, right? That everything in life had to be hard. And that's to say that I'm trying to make it easy, but I'm trying to make it more efficient and better, right? So to kind of describe the process of what it was like to translate something like a peace soccer book, which I think was really amazing. And in some ways, it's still not done, right? Because it has to go through the editing process to make it right, because it is something's book. So effort does need to go into it as well to make sure that it's the most polished form that it can be, right? But for me, at first, the first thing was reading it in Korean. And on the first take, I wasn't even intending to translate it at the time. And so because of that, I was just reading for my own personal curiosity and enjoyment, and for the future, unbeknownst to me at the time. And so I'm not taking notes while I'm doing it. I'm not really thinking about translating while I'm doing it. Nothing of the sort. And so that was at first this kind of problem that I had while reading it. And so when I finally went to translate it, I was like, oh boy, I don't know what this is going to be like, right? And I have to reread the whole thing, right? Because when you're reading something just for personal absorption, you're not combing through it, right? Combing through every sentence and every word to make sure that you understood each and everything. You're kind of going passage by passage, chapter by chapter, to make sure that you have the flow of the whole, right? And so when it came to translating and making sure that I have captured the artist's intent verbatim, it became a whole different project and a whole different scope. And not just that, right? And as you can imagine, it would already be much more efficient if, let's say, like the electronic file for the book was available for us, right? But one, this book is not new. Like, this book came out a long time ago. And, I'm not doing this in an official capacity, right? I'm not a part of like a translation team for some of these books or anything like that. And my Korean is like not good enough to do that like without using like a bunch of internet tools and stuff like that, right? So I was like, okay, that's not me. And plus, like, knowing how tight security is, and given like the time frame of when I was doing this, right? This was like 2024, like in starting from 2023, right? There's all of these security problems, right? I was like, okay, I know that if I like if I'm even asking for something like this, like people are like, I just felt like the automatic answer was gonna be no. And so there was that at the time. And so I was like, the only thing that I could do was to read the Korean, and because having an electronic file would be helpful at the time, I would read it out loud and transcribe my video, or like transcribe my audio, or I would take pictures, screenshots, page by page, and then copy the text over, and then use like various translation tools like Google Translate to translate, right, to have that first draft of the translation. And yeah, that's doable, but that's painstaking and it takes forever, right? And of course, like translating an entire book in and of itself is already a large task, right? So it is highly inefficient. And I will say that it got a lot more efficient in Korea, because when I was staying with my cousins, she saw me doing this and she was kind of curious. She's like, "Oh, like what are you doing, right? Like what is it that you're like attempting to do?" And I was telling you that I read this book and it was so good, and I really believe that it should be available in English, and so I'm working on translating it, right? So she's like, "Wow, that sounds really tough," right? Like, and after like she saw me do it a few times, she's like, "Do you want me to just type up the whole book for you?" She's like, "I'm a fast typer, and I think it'll be much easier for me to type it up, and that way I get a chance to read this book too." Right. And so that, of course I didn't want to bother her with it, but since she was willing, I was like, that would be really amazing. And so she saved me an astronomical amount of time to do it. Right. And at least for this project, right, she herself got to read it and she really gained so much. She was like, "Wow, I didn't know a book like this existed. I didn't know something that gave this kind of messages, all those kind of things." And so I hope also by this that you guys are getting excited to possibly read this book in the future, right? She gained so much, right? She's not a soccer player, and me neither. I'm not like really a soccer player, and yet like I gained so much by reading this book, right? But based on this week's message, by becoming competent, by learning, by studying how to do it better, like even before I listened to this message in detail, like yesterday when I was listening to this message in Korean, that thought crossed my mind. Like, wow, of course I would have to do this officially and like communicate everything and make sure that it's done officially, right? But as long as we can get the electronic file, then I could use even some things like AI tools to come up with an entire draft of the book pretty quickly, right? And yeah, there's a ton of kinks still to work out, and I'm sure that as time goes by, I can find even better and more efficient ways to do this. And in fact, like if you have ideas on how I can like make this process even better, right? It refers to a lot of things, right? One, it's about efficiency, as we mentioned. Two, it's about like, oh, maybe there's like a better way, a best way that the Holy Trinity have. And maybe there's also just tools that I'm not aware of that that you're like, oh, I think this could really help with this, right? Not just with with helping Eddie, but just helping in general with any of these kind of like any even remotely related tasks that you think will be very helpful, right? There's these kind of things, or there's just something that you feel like I'm not seeing. I'm more than willing to listen, because even this, like if we could do this and like have this initial rough draft, all it would take is for people like editors to comb through and like Korean editors and English editors to comb through, people who have a decent grasp of both, to make sure that the language fits, that it's not just like a good translation, but it's a good book in English that makes sense, and that it doesn't leave out any of the feeling and the artistry and the expressions in Korean, right? And if translator notes are important, like, or necessary, then like they can include those in, right? And stuff like that. But like even just like having like an initial draft done by AI, that would save tens of, and if not hundreds of work hours to get that done. Probably not hundreds. Depends on the book, right? And like some of these books, like like if it's a very detailed story or a series, like the Vietnam War series, yeah, that might take like hundreds, right? But this could save a bunch of time, and this is something that you could do. We could collaborate with something and report to them and say that we really believe that this book and these books should be available in other languages. And like now that, like, I didn't even think about this, but not even just in English, but in German, in French, in any other language, right? In Spanish, right? And I mean, I think it's already available in Chinese and Japanese, but in these Western languages too, right? From these tools. And so that was a thought that came from listening to the message today and yesterday, and it made me very excited. And this is only one of the many things that came from listening to the word, but it's something that I hope to go forward on. And as one of the important things to do with this is like not just to do this excited and ignorant, like in my own way, but to do it together with God, right? And to check with Him and to see, like, God, is this what you want? And to check with, not just with our external eyes, but check with the Holy Spirit and check with our hearts to see if this is the right thing. Right? And of course, like, we do this by practicing and becoming more competent at this. And so instead of just going people and asking for work, like for me, this is something that I would want to do, right? Of these, of like a number of many things that I would want to do in Providence. This is one of those things. And this came to mind too. And I'm not gonna say that my concerns about this are actually the case. But one of my concerns was, like, initially, without the idea of using AI, the initial thought was to recruit Korean and English speakers who are adept at Korean and English to become part of a translation team. And I'm still not opposed to that idea, but when that was the initial thought process, I was like, one, I'm sure there would be people who are interested. I'm sure. But two, the secondary concern, if there aren't people who are really interested, and interest doesn't just mean interest. Interest means like what the message says about the word, right? Some people will be interested in the idea, but when it comes to executing and doing it, the interest won't be of that like degree. Right? It's like with the farmer who sowed seeds, right? Some seeds will land on the road, right, where it'll quickly like grow up, but then like as the sun comes up, it'll be baked and and it'll shrivel up and die, or it'll be eaten up by birds, or it'll be consumed by Satan, right? And like, yeah, while we may get seeds that really take it upon themselves to translate well, I was like, man, just approaching at this by gathering manpower and manpowering this, like, it didn't seem to really resolve the like how long it takes and stuff. And so of course we could still do that. And now that I'm saying that, maybe we still do need that. And like, if we have a team, it doesn't mean that everyone has to become a very fruitful tree, but as long as there are some fruitful trees, right, then that's better than nothing. And like, that's the hope that we would have from the beginning, right? So we had to do both, but I still found that there's ways to optimize and become more competent and to make this better and to make it more exciting too, right? Both in terms of the product of having these books for us, right? So as you can say, he recorded everything that happened in Providence history in all of the books that he's written. Now, how incredible is that? But in the English language, we have a fraction of those books. And I'll be honest, even in Korean, I'm sure a fraction of the members in Providence have read those books, right? It's like, and this is just to do with school too, right? Like, like even in the world, a fraction of people like really pursue like the highest levels of education. And on top of everything, right, there's so much more that we have going on. But like for many of us, and I'll say this especially for Korean speakers, because I'm not going to call out English speakers like this, but in Korea too, many people buy these books. And I'm not saying like everyone does this, but like sometimes it just becomes decorations, right? Like in the house or in the church, right? And like that's not the point of these books, right? The point of the books is to be able to read the stories and know, right? Because if you do not know, as his message said, it is suffering and death, right? How are you going to testify about something? How are you going to know clearly if you don't know his stories and his life and his words and the things that he's done, the things that the Trinity's done through? If you don't know these things clearly, of course these things come up in the messages, but he also wrote these books for a reason. Even in the most difficult of situations, these books were compiled to tell the story from the beginning to the end clearly, so that the history for the next 1,000 years could use them. And so they must be translated into all the languages and must be made available. Of course, in the proper way, like being published and being edited in the proper way, like with Sunzingim together with them, making sure that we're not just like, doing this on our own and violating copyright. And there's but of course, there's many concerns that can be done. But those are all questions for us to figure out and to check and to learn, to become more competent in, to make sure that we're doing everything correctly. Anyway, so these are some of the thoughts. Like this was one of the biggest things for me that I want to learn and become more competent in. And I hope that, and I really believe that each person in Providence has something that they've been wanting to do, right? It could be something that you were complaining about, right? In terms of like Providence, but in actuality, complaining about, your life in Providence and something too. And maybe you weren't complaining. Maybe it's something that you were working on and something that, you weren't able to do well, or something that you were already doing well in, but you could definitely take to the next level, right? Let's all learn, right? So that we can make history in this great way. Anyways, like these are my thoughts from Bible today. And with that, we'll go into the second break and I'll catch you guys next week. And after that, we'll hand it off to Rachel with 2G Talks.
We must try our best, you and I both. We must try our best, you and I both. Research, realize. Do all you can with wisdom, wits, and knowledge. Study all God is thinking and what He wants until you can reach the heaven. With all your effort, think and keep trying, starting research, then take action. God will look and will say, this surely fits my heart, this fits my heart. Yes, I like it. Therefore, let's take action. Fitting to God's heart, we have to make ourselves, both you and I. Since we are brides of the heavens, we will make sure to meet their expectations and take action. Fitting to God's heart, we have to make ourselves, both you and I. Since we are brides of the heavens, we will
Welcome back, everyone, to 2G Talks. Rachel here. 2G Talks is the segment I hope to be able to share Second Gen's experience in Providence, while also discussing other topics related to Second Gen, all centered only on the Lord. For today's 2G Talks, I want to talk about birth dreams and learning about yourself. Hey y'all! It's officially been over a week since 3/16. And the days just continuously roll on by. Really, I feel like I'm getting to an age where it's not just the days anymore that are moving so quickly, but it's the years, actually. I just turned 25 years old, so I'm kind of going through my quarter-life crisis, if you could say that. It's not really the age. It's a couple of things. One of them is just, honestly, I never thought that I was going to be this old, or I should say, I never thought I was going to make it to this age. And it's not that I thought I was going to die young or anything, and that's a whole nother story, but I simply couldn't fathom the idea of being 25 years old. Even when I really think about it, like, I don't feel 25. If anything, I feel like maybe I'm 20 years old still. But I did actually look forward to growing older. And again, like I said, I am happy being 25 years old, especially because I heard a lot of different things, and people were saying that, oh, when you turn 25, your frontal lobe fully develops. And it may be different for, like boys and girls. Maybe girls, our brain fully develops more faster. I'm not sure. But I have seen a few reels on Instagram when they were saying, for example, like, quote, the day I turned 25, I woke up and I felt my whole world shift, or I had this grand realization and I realized who I was as a person, etc., etc. People, they say that they have that. And it was because of that feeling and this universal experience that I've seen many people online having. That was one of the reasons why I was so excited to turn 25. I even told one of my friends, like, I was going to let her know as soon as I had a big realization or something. So I guess my quarter-life crisis is not really about me turning 25 years old, but it's more so about the fact that I'm closer to turning 30, because now that's only 5 years away, and that really freaks me out. But I know that some said, your 30s is when you start, your 30s, 40s, I think, your 40s and your 50s are when you start receiving all those blessings. And that in your 30s is when your habits and your mentalities fully become set. So right now I'm trying to take this quarter-life crisis mentality of me freaking out and stressing about 5 years and instead turn it into something more conducive and beneficial for me, because I want to be able to create the habits and the life that I want for myself here on out. And so it's really important, and I just want to use these next couple of years to make myself in that way, which I think fits so perfectly with the message that we got, which was all about learning, right? And in the Sunday message, there's a lot of different points. I'm sure Pastor Sky talked about them, but some of the key subsequent headings of the messages were, I believe, learning about time, learn how to use time, learn about precious people, learn about your counterparts, and the one that I really felt drawn to and was really inspired by was the learn about yourself. And that's kind of the focus of my 2G talks that I wanted to cover today. For second generation to learn about themselves, really everyone, I should say, in the world, no matter their age, gender, or background, we all go through a time of self-discovery about ourselves, and it starts in our youth. Now, of course, disclaimer, I'm not a doctor or a child psychologist or any of the above. This was just from a quick search that I actually found what occurs in our brains psychologically as we progress through the different stages of life. And I thought it was really interesting and fascinating. I do remember learning about this, so I want to cover it real quick. So In our infancy, that's 0 to 1 years old, this is when we start expressing our basic emotions like joy, fear, distress, when we start learning those things. When we are toddlers, 1 to 3 years old, this is when we start to develop independence, exploring boundaries, learning to share. In our preschool years, 3 to 5 years old, this is when we actually learn empathy and basic cooperation. In our elementary school years, from 5 to 7 years old, this is actually when we start to form friendships, follow rules, routines, and we learn to seek approval from adults. And middle elementary, 7 to 9 years old, this is actually when we begin to understand and see other people's perspectives, as well as valuing fairness and justice. In the late elementary years, 9 to 11 years old, this is when we start to seek social belonging and develop a sense of right and wrong. Early adolescence, this is when we start seeing identity exploration beginning, questions about authority and norms. Middle adolescence, which is 14 to 16 years old, is when we start seeking autonomy, navigating peer pressure, and start to develop romantic interest. And then in our late adolescence, this is when we start to develop our sense of self-identity, when we begin to actually balance our independence, relationships, and future responsibilities. I thought that was super cool. Oh, and that late adolescence period is from 16 to 18 years old. And so I thought that was really cool, and I think it lines up perfectly with what we see in everyone, obviously, but with our second gen as well. As a second gen, when we're growing up from our infants to early adolescent stage, which again, that early adolescent stage was from 11 to 14 years old, most second gen, you see the kids, they're doing really well, their faith is good, they don't really have issues in Providence. They seem to, follow Providence and follow their parents pretty well. But once we start getting into that early, middle, and especially the late adolescence period, which is going to be from 11 to 18 years old, this is when we start seeing the second generation are trying to find their greater sense of self. They're trying to find out who they are, what do they want, do they even like Providence, do they agree with it? They start having these questions that begin to arise. And for many people, I think it could be misconstrued in the sense that, well, this is so strange. Oh, the second gen was doing so well, and now all of a sudden they're causing quote-unquote problems and they're doubting. But as I just read, honestly, this is a natural and normal thing that is going to happen as human beings grow and develop. For me personally, I don't see it. And when I was growing up and going through these things, yes, I was doubting and questioning Providence personally, but it was more so, I think, connected directly to our form of self-discovery, trying to understand our own self-identity, right? Everything that these second gen are doing in these stages of life is in hopes to actually understand themselves at a deeper level. And this absolutely includes Providence. Because Providence has been such a huge, it's their entire life practically. It's this massive portion of their identity. And so as they're looking at themselves and questioning themselves, it's not surprising to me that Providence would be something that they actually also begin to wrestle with or even struggle with. Of course, once they're able to find themselves, they can do anything. They can overcome problems. They go back to being, all for Providence or whatever their path may be. Of course, like I said, everyone has a different path, different journey of finding themselves. For myself, I had a lot of ups and downs. Y'all know already. I needed a lot of support from my friends and my family, and especially from my mom. And of course, not every second gen is going to go through that process of doing really well and then going through this phase of self-identity, self-discovery, and then coming back and doing really well in Providence. There are some people who don't always come back right away to Providence. But I think that at the end of the day, God knows who we are going to become. And I say this to give hope, but also to kind of put it into perspective. For each and every single one of us, second gen or members, there are so many paths that are set before us that God has seen or laid out. And according to what we do and the actions that we take and what our parents do and what our friends, how they influence us, all these different things, we determine the path that we take. We become a mosaic of what was made before us and of what we choose to be. And so, regardless of all the different paths that we may take, I think God always, Sansom says he always knows, almighty, all-knowing, and omniscient. For myself, you know my story, and if you don't, right, my parents are blessed, family, my parents split, and then my dad left Providence. Who knows what path my life would have, or was originally, if my parents had remained together happily, and if my dad had never left Providence. I probably would have been a very, very different person. But at the core of all those things, there are some key characteristics and key things that I can see within myself that God made and that God knew. And what do I mean by that? Well, actually, this is where it comes into my intro, the birth dreams that I wanted to talk about, because these specific birth dreams, when I hear about them, when my mom tells me, I think, oh wow, that that is really me. So I asked her about these dreams, and she told me. So birth dreams, if you don't know, they're not really a Western thing. I think they're more of a Eastern type of thing. Essentially, before you have a child, the mother will have a dream, and it'll kind of reveal a little bit more about the unborn infant in the womb, right? And so, all the way back in 1999, my mom asked, and she had prayed to receive a dream about me, to receive a birth dream. I believe it was later that week. It may have been, sometime later. She had a dream. And there was 2 parts to this dream, I guess. Same dream, but different scenes. And I asked her which one came first. She said she doesn't remember. So I'm just going to go with what I think. The first dream that she said was she was in a really large garden or a field where there was like a playground. And that as she was walking towards the park, she saw there was a set of swings. And on one of those swings, she saw a little girl in a pink dress and pigtails swinging back and forth. The girl all of a sudden looked up at her and joyfully shouted out, "Mommy!" This is what woke her up with a start. And then she realized that she was, it confirmed the fact that she was pregnant. And from that, she knew that I was going to be a girl. Because evidently she had asked God what I was going to be, girl or boy. The second dream that she had, or second part, I should say, was that she was in a large garden, and it was a field filled with flowers and different fruits and hedges of grass around her. And as she was walking down the path, she saw a tiny little baby, really fat, chunky, chubby baby, sitting at the intersection of these 4 paths that came together. My mother thought, oh, she's so fat and so cute. So much so that this tiny little chunky baby could barely walk because she just had little fat stumps for legs. So my mother began walking towards, or Mel, I should say, began walking towards the baby. As soon as she started walking towards the baby who was sitting down at the intersection, all of a sudden these snakes immediately jumped out and started racing towards the baby. As they were racing towards the baby, they unhinged their jaws and they let their tongues out hissing at the baby, ready to devour it. Mel immediately knew that she wasn't going to be fast enough to get to the baby in time before the snakes, but she still ran full throttle towards the baby, even though she wasn't going to be fast enough. As she's running towards the baby with all her might, she sees 2 snakes lunge towards this baby. And immediately she reaches out her arms and dives and tries to protect the baby, screaming, "No, please, no!" And then all of a sudden, it's over. Mel looks up at the baby to see what had become of the little girl that was there. And she sees the baby is laying there, eyes wide open, and the baby's laughing. Somehow, the little girl, the little baby that was sitting there, was all right. So as Mel got up and approached closer towards this intersection where the infant was, she saw in the meaty hands of the baby had taken the snake's necks, or I should say maybe their heads, and had crushed them in between her tiny, meaty fingers. The child sat triumphantly in the middle of the intersection as she rattled the dead snake's corpses around, giggling delightfully as they flung around her. Mel was shocked and in awe. What type of baby was this? And so then she woke up from her dream. So that was the second dream. So these are the two birth dreams that my mom had regarding me. And she told me, I think the first dream, the one where she saw me on the swing, the girl on the swing, just simply had to do with telling her the gender of the baby. But the second dream had to tell her more about the character of the baby. And I think that's what I was trying to get at when I meant God always knows the core. There was a lot of things in my life that happened that I don't believe was God's absolute will, right? Because God absolutely wills for only good and great things to happen in our life. But there was a lot of things that definitely were not like that. People did things, took action according to their own thinking, and eventually ruined God's will. But God's absolute will, the things that He knows that He made me to have, my characteristics, that core, my center, even all that happened, my center always, and every single one of our centers and cores are always the same. And they're always love, they're always strength. And especially I see that in myself after going through my own personal hardships and struggles with providence and really coming to terms with this history and coming to terms with myself and self-discovery. I look back at those dreams and those kind of realizations about myself, and I still see that chubby little girl with the snakes in her arms, because as I was going through those hard times, I could see myself defeating Satan's and defeating my own thinking and my own thoughts at my own level, which eventually got me back to this history. So I think for other second gen around the world, at whatever age or place that you may be in Providence, your core is always going to be God. Everyone's core is always going to be God. This is for the little second gen who happily follow their parents. This is for the second gen who are starting to go through that phase of self-discovery and understanding their own identity. This is for the second gen that aren't so sure and are doubting. This is for the second gen even that don't come to Providence back immediately, or that do come to immediately back to Providence. Regardless, the core is always God, because God made all of us in His image and in His likeness. So whether we like it or not, and I think it is a great thing, we all have God within ourselves. So looping back to my testimony or discussion about self-identity, discovering yourself, as well as learning about yourself, the only and the best way to do that is to come to learn about God. I really wouldn't have known who I was as a person if I didn't ask and seek God in that way. All right, I probably would have fallen into the worse or the more lacking parts of myself, because those are the easier things to fall into. The habits, the bad habits, right? I think Apostle Paul said it in the Bible where, his body wants to do the things that his mind does not want to do because he is a slave to sin. And I think all of us in the same way, we are all like that. And so to become someone who truly can find themselves and have self-discovery, and I can testify in this way, I have truly come to know and come to find myself in coming to know and coming to find God. Otherwise, it is very, very difficult. And so I hope that everyone listening, whether you are second gen or not a second gen, continue to learn. Sansom said we will always learn until the day we die. And even when we go to heaven, we will continue to learn even more. So I hope that we can all continue to work on discovering ourselves and discovering God, because God is boundless and eternal. And there's so many things to know about him. And in the same way, there's so many amazing things and wonderful, beautiful, majestic things to learn about ourselves too. So if you have any tips on being 25, or if there's anything I should look out for, please feel free to comment below. If you have anything that you would love to share about 316 as well, I would love to hear it also. And again, to all my wonderful and beautiful brothers and sisters in Providence, I wish you all a great rest of your Tuesday. Please feel free to leave a like, or you can email Eddie and I at 2gtalks@gmail.com. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all next week.